17 years after a deputy sheriff vanished, his cruiser turns up in a barn. The morning sun stretched long fingers of light across the weathered boards as Jake Morrison hauled open the heavy barn doors. Dust swirled and shimmered in the beams slipping. Through the warped planks, he'd owned the Hartwell farm for 3 months. But until now, he'd never ventured into this back storage barn. Mrs. Hartwell, the elderly previous owner, had waved it off as just old equipment, sold him the place. His boots rang against the concrete floor. Rusted scythes and pitchforks dangled from hooks. Tractors slept under sagging tarps. In the far corner, half hidden by feed sacks, something metallic glinted. Jake moved closer. His breath hitched. Under a moth-eaten canvas sat the unmistakable silhouette of a police cruiser, paint bleached bodywork, riddled with rust, emergency light bar dulled but intact. He pulled the cover back. Millbrook County Sheriff gleamed faintly in faded gold letters along the side. The driver's door hung ajar. Inside, a coffee mug with a local diner's logo, a clipboard stacked with official forms, scattered personal items frozen in time. Hands shook as he pulled out his phone. 911. What's your emergency? This is Jake Morrison at the old Hartwell farm on County Road. 47. I just found a sheriff's department cruiser in my barn. Looks like it's been here for decades. The dispatcher's voice crackled. Don't touch anything. Units are on the way. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Patricia Reeves arrived with 2 deputies. Tall, mid-50s, gray hair in a nonsense bun. Jake remembered her from the property sale. Mr. Morrison, she said, show me. She circled the car, phone camera snapping, then leaned toward the driver's window. This is Unit 247, she said at last. It belonged to Deputy Thomas Brennan. He disappeared in 1986. We never found his car. Jake stared. What happened to him? Last call we had from him was March 15, 1986. He was headed to a domestic disturbance. Radio contact died just before midnight. We searched for weeks. Nothing. Deputy Martinez called out from the far side of the car. Sheriff found this under the seat. An evidence bag glinted in the light inside. A battered pocket notebook. That's Tom's, Reeves said quietly. He never went anywhere. Without it, within the hour, the barn swarmed with white-suited crime scene techs. Jake watched from the farmhouse porch as they worked under the watchful eye of Detective Sarah Chen from the state police. This car was driven here soon after Brennan disappeared, Chen said, pointing out the still-clipped radio on the dash. And a half-eaten sandwich on the seat, now mummified with age. No sign of struggle inside, but look in the trunk. The lock had been pried open. Inside sat Brennan's equipment belt, service weapon still holstered. He didn't even draw, Chen murmured. Either someone he trusted, or someone fast. Sheriff Reeves stood with her arms folded, gaze locked on the cruiser. Tom Brennan was a 15-year veteran. He didn't spook easy. Jake's unease deepened with each revelation. The barn felt heavier now, thick with a history no one had warned him about. By nightfall, portable floodlights lit the yard, casting hard shadows against the barn wall. Reeves approached Jake before leaving. Think hard about anything Mrs. Hartwell said to you, even casual remarks. Every detail matters. I'll try. We'll need to interview you tomorrow. This will be all over the news by morning. When the last squad car rolled down the gravel drive, Jake stood alone, the cool night air settling around him. Somewhere in the darkness behind him, in that silent barn, Unit 247 waited a ghost of 1986. And a story no one yet understood. The warning the barn doors were now bound with bright yellow crime scene tape, a silent barricade to the past. Jake stood a few yards away, staring at the old farmhouse and wondering if one secret had waited 17 years in the barn, what else might be hiding behind those walls? His phone rang. An unfamiliar number flashed across the screen. Mr. Morrison, this is David Brennan. I heard about what you found. Tom Brennan was my father. By morning, a black sedan with Illinois plates rolled into the driveway. David Brennan stepped out, early 40s, dark hair, his father's strong jaw. Jake met him at the door, offered coffee, and led him into the kitchen. I appreciate you calling me, David said, settling in at the table. 17 years, I've been wondering. Not knowing was worse than any answer could be. Sheriff Reeves arrived minutes later, carrying a thick file folder. Mr. Brennan, I wish we met under better circumstances. This is the original case. File from 1986. Thought you'd want to see it? David opened it with care. On top was a black and white photograph of Deputy Thomas Brennan in uniform, smiling, confident. "I was 25 when he disappeared," David murmured. "Just finished law school in Chicago. I kept waiting for him to call." Reeves spread the documents across the table. Last radio contact was 11:47 p.m., March 15, 1986. Your father was responding to a domestic disturbance at 412 Maple Street. 30 minutes passed with no arrival. Dispatch called, no response. "Who made the call?" David asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Reeves said. "We could never trace it. The number was disconnected. The address was vacant." Jake leaned forward. "So someone lured him there." "That was our suspicion," Reeves confirmed. "We found tire tracks, but in '86, the tech wasn't there to do much with them." Detective Sarah Chen stepped in, carrying her own stack of files. "I've been reviewing the investigation. The timeline is curious. March 15th was also the night of the monthly county commissioners meeting. Robert Hartwell was present. Until 11 p.m., David scanned the timeline, meaning he'd have been driving home about the same time my father was responding to that call. County Road 47 runs right past Hartwell's farm." Reeves unrolled a map. "Your father was last seen at the courthouse around 10:30 p.m., talking to Robert Hartwell, Judge William Patterson, and County Attorney Marcus Webb. They were discussing budget allocations for the Sheriff's Department." Chen made a note. "Mr. Brennan, did your father ever mention problems with officials?" "Only that some influential people got special treatment," David replied. "He never named names, but said it was becoming an issue." Jake's voice was low. "Are you saying he might have been investigating corruption?" "It's possible," Reeves said. "Tom was known for his integrity. If he found proof of wrongdoing, he wouldn't have ignored it." Chen produced an evidence bag. Inside the notebook found under the seat of the cruiser. She opened it to March 1986. March 10th, RH meeting with contractors again, same company as before. Need to verify permits. March 12th, license plate checks on vehicles at RH property to register to out-of-state companies. March 14th, documents requested from county clerk. "We'll review tomorrow," RH David asked. "Robert Hartwell," Reeves answered. Chen flipped to the final entry. March 15th, call from anonymous source. Important information about RH contracts. Meeting tonight after commissioner's meeting. Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. That's the call that sent him to the vacant address. "Looks like it," Chen said. "Someone used the Hartwell investigation to lure him into a trap." Reeves straightened. "We need to pull those county contracts from 1986. If Tom was digging into them, that could be the motive." David closed the file and the others at the meeting. Patterson and Webb, both deceased. Patterson in '92, Webb in '98. "But their files might still be in storage," Reeves said. Chen was already gathering her papers. "I'm heading to the courthouse archives, Mr. Brennan. If you're willing, you might recognize something we'd overlook." "Absolutely," David said. "I want answers." After they left, Jake wandered the property. From the road, the barn was invisible in the dark, only 200 yards from the main house. Easy to hide a vehicle there without anyone noticing. The concrete floor showed old stains, oil or something else. Near the entrance, faint tire marks pressed into the dirt. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Stop looking or you'll end up like the deputy." Jake's stomach dropped. He dialed Reeves immediately. "I just got a threat," he said. "What exactly did it say?" she asked. Loose ends tightened. Jake read the text message aloud. "Can you trace the number?" Reeves asked. "We'll try. But, Mr. Morrison, you shouldn't stay here tonight. Whoever killed Tom Brennan may still be in Millbrook. And now, they know you've reopened their 17-year-old secret." Jake packed a bag and drove to a small motel in the next town. Even there, the thin walls and humming neon didn't feel safe. The phone rang again. "Reeves, Mr. Morrison. The crime scene team just sent results. We found fingerprints in the cruiser. They don't match Brennan. We're running them now. Any hits? Not yet. But we also recovered microscopic paint chips from the bumper. Looks like another vehicle struck or pushed it, possibly when they moved the cruiser after the murder." Jake lay awake most of the night thinking about a deputy ambushed, a son who never got closure, and the fact that tomorrow the real work would begin. ND Journal, its pages yellowed and its entries dated sporadically. From 1979 to 1984, the handwriting was tight, nervous, and full of angry. Up until that moment, the dominant theory had been an accident, maybe a fall, maybe dehydration, maybe a snake bite. But these final words hinted at something far more disturbing. Daniel had not been alone. Deputy Duncan began combing through old missing person cases from 1980 to 1985 across central Texas. One name stood out: Elias Monroe, a drifter, arrested. In 1979 for trespassing near Llano County, he was known for vanishing into the wilderness for months at a time. In 1981, a sheriff's log noted that Monroe had been spotted barefoot near Hickory Creek. And then, nothing. Monroe was never arrested again. No confirmed sightings. No body. Could Monroe have been the man Daniel saw? Or was it someone else? Entirely a hermit, a fugitive, or something stranger? After news broke of the 1995 campsite discovery, Central Texas erupted in speculation. Headlines asked, "Writer's lost camp found after 14 years. Was Daniel Whitaker being watched?" Old rumors resurfaced. A rancher named Henry Mallister, now in his 70s, recalled goats going missing near Buzzards Hollow in the early 80s. He once found animal bones arranged in a circle near a dry creek bed. A former game warden, Travis Bell, told the Llano Gazette that in 1982 he stumbled on a makeshift shelter hidden deep in a gulch lined with animal pelts, stocked with canned food, and covered in strange drawings on the rock walls. He never reported it. It didn't seem criminal, just odd. When he returned months later, the shelter had been burned to the ground. None of these accounts could be tied directly to Daniel, but taken together, they suggested a troubling possibility. Someone had been living in those hills, watching, moving, surviving, maybe even hunting. Theories multiplied. The recluse theory. Daniel had crossed paths with a territorial loner, someone who saw him as a threat and either scared him into fleeing or ensured he never left. The feral man theory, echoing old Texas folklore. This posited that Daniel encountered a mentally unstable man who had abandoned civilization entirely and survived alone for years. The paranoia theory skeptics claimed Daniel's final words reflected heat exhaustion or sleep deprivation. He might have imagined a stalker and gotten lost while trying to escape a danger that wasn't real. Rebecca Whitaker never believed that last one. "My brother wasn't a paranoid man," she told reporters. "He was precise. If he said he saw someone, he saw someone." And her conviction kept the case alive, at least unofficially. In the minds of those who'd been following it since 1981, one piece of evidence from the site had been dismissed at first: the broken 35mm camera lens found near the collapsed tent. But in January 1996, after public pressure, the Texas Department of Public Safety sent the entire camera body lens, and whatever was left of the film, to a lab specializing in salvaging degraded media. It took weeks. The camera's casing was rusted, its internal components fused with corrosion. Moisture damage had glued much of the film together. But in the end, technicians managed to recover 3 frames from the final roll. Frame 1, a wide landscape. Classic Daniel perfect horizon, tree branches framing the shot, golden light spilling across the hills. Nothing unusual. Frame 2, a self-timed portrait. Daniel stands in front of a rock formation, holding the remote shutter in one hand. He isn't smiling. His shoulders are tense. But that wasn't what drew attention. In the background, between 2 trees, stood a figure, barely visible at first glance. A man, slim build, unkempt hair, no visible gear. One shoulder pressed against a tree trunk as if hiding. The angle of his head, the faint glint in his eyes. It looked as though he was staring straight at the camera. Frame 3, damaged beyond recognition. Just streaks of light and shadow. That second photograph, grainy, imperfect, but undeniable, pushed the mystery of Daniel Whitaker into a realm from which it has never escaped, because it proved one thing beyond all doubt in those last days of June 1981. Daniel Whitaker wasn't alone. Frame 3, grainy, dark, and likely snapped by accident under the cover of night. In the bottom corner, just barely visible, a blurred hand reached forward, whose hand it was David Mercer's or someone else's. Impossible to determine. Those 3 photographs were enough for former Deputy Alan Harlow to pull the dusty case file from its drawer. They didn't solve the mystery, but they proved something no one could deny. David Mercer had not been alone out there. Despite the renewed attention, the trail went cold almost immediately. The unknown cameraman, the shadowy figure in the trees, and whatever path David had taken, simply dissolved, swallowed by time, wilderness, or human will. No body, no confession, no witnesses. In 1997, David Mercer was declared legally dead, though his mother, Elaine, refused to hold a funeral. She kept 3 things in her home office: his battered field journal, an enhanced version of that eerie photo, and a map of Pine Hollow pinned to the wall with a single red tack at a place marked Buzzard's Rest. That same year, in an interview with a local station, Elaine said, "Somewhere in those hills, someone knows. Maybe they knew then. And maybe one day, silence won't be enough to keep it hidden." By early 1998, Alan Harlow was no longer a deputy. He'd hung up the badge and was working as a private investigator when he got a call from Bobby Cole, a caretaker on a remote ranch 30 miles southwest of Hickory Creek. The ranch had once belonged to a man named Harold Knoxa, reclusive. Landowner who'd died in 1995, Knox had lived alone on more than 2,000 acres. Much of it pressed against the southern edge of Buzzard's Rest. He was infamous for keeping people off his property by any means necessary. While clearing out Knox's attic, Bobby had found a sealed metal box. Inside was a cracked leather boo. Paranoid ramblings. One entry from June 1981 read, "Saw a stranger on the North Ridge. Not local. Camera around his neck. Don't like it. Don't trust it. Not the first one wandering through here." Another, dated June 9th, 1981, was even shorter. Still no sign of the hiker. Maybe he found what was left. It wasn't signed. But it was chilling. Harlow pushed for a quiet search of Knox's old land. By then, the property had passed to a distant nephew who didn't mind, so long as they stayed away from the livestock fences. On March 28, 1998, Harlow, 2 volunteers, and a cadaver dog hiked into a low, narrow valley that had never been surveyed. What they found there felt like something out of an old campfire story, the remains of a collapsed stone shelter, possibly a hunting hide decades old, scattered bones of deer and goat, some deliberately stacked in triangular formations, and under a rusted sheet of iron nailed into the hillside. A sealed tin box. Inside were 3 things: 2.22 caliber rounds, a faded Polaroid of a rocky ridge, and a necklace, a small silver compass pendant. Elaine Mercer later confirmed the compass belonged to David. "It was a gift from my father." She said, "David never went anywhere without it." Still no body. Still no certainty. But for the first time, they had a link between David and a place far from his last known campsite. In June 1998, advanced touch DNA testing recovered degraded biological residue from the compass hinge. It wasn't enough for a homicide ruling, but partial markers matched David's DNA from a toothbrush his sister had kept. The question became unavoidable. How did the compass get there? Had David fled, been chased, or had someone taken it after? The fact, Harlow dug into Harold Knox's past. What surfaced was unsettling. In the late 70s, Knox had been charged with pointing a rifle at 2 hikers. The charges vanished when both victims refused to return to Texas to testify. Locals claimed Knox talked to shadows, certain that strangers were scouting his land for oil companies or the government. One elderly neighbor claimed Knox had once mentioned burying something near a split rock and a broken cedar, telling him it was to keep secrets safe from thieves. By November 1998, Harlow was back in Buzzard's Rest, 2 days into the southern stretch where Knox's land met public ground. He found it a towering boulder split clean down the middle, likely by lightning. Beneath it, a depression in the dirt had been carefully filled with stones. It took hours to dig out. At the bottom lay a rusted metal ammo box. Inside, a charred, unreadable notebook and a single Polaroid clear and unmistakable David Mercer. Hands behind his back, eyes unfocused, the shot taken at dusk. The trees in the background were unfamiliar. The photo was real. The question was, who took it? The FBI stepped in by early 1999, bringing in Special Agent Teresa Lyle, a forensic image analyst with expertise in wilderness crimes. Under high-resolution scans, she noted 2 things. The lighting and exposure settings indicated someone who knew photography. The photographer had been standing at eye level, less than 10 feet away. Drag marks in the dirt trailed from David's boots, and barely visible in shadow what looked like thin rope around his wrists. It was no longer a missing persons case. By spring 1999, parts of Buzzard's Rest were under quiet surveillance. Harlow believed someone had helped Knox or had taken over the land after his death. Smoke from hidden fires had been spotted from a distance. Hunting cabins miles away were found broken into. One rancher swore he heard a voice deep in the woods shout, "Get off the trail," though no one was ever seen. The land was too wild, too vast. Whoever was out there knew it better than anyone else ever could. Late in 1999, a private hunting lease survey uncovered a buried oil drum sealed with industrial-grade tape. Inside, a cracked, rotted hiking boot. 3 undeveloped rolls of film, a metal canister scratched with the initials D. The film was sent to Quantico. Only 2 frames survived. One a close-up of a journal page not found among David's known writings. The other a blurred image of a fire at night, with a lone figure sitting beside it, too far away to identify. The journal page read, "If someone finds this, I want them to know I tried to leave. I made it to the hollow, but he was faster. I don't know how long I've been here. I hear things moving at night. Sometimes I think I'm already gone." In 2000, the disappearance of Jonathan Crestwell was officially reclassified as a homicide by persons unknown. A memorial service was held in Boulder, where his sister, Melissa, stood at the podium and read passages from his recovered field journal, her voice trembling with emotion. Authorities refused to name a suspect publicly, yet internal memos hinted at one Howard Kell. Those documents suggested Kell had either been directly involved in more, or had at least witnessed, the final days of Crestwell's life, and they hinted there may have been others. The land where the mystery began was eventually sold, and the canyon that once echoed with questions fell silent again. Still, hikers who pass Buzzard's Hollow sometimes pause at a cedar tree near the cliff edge. Around its trunk, they stack small circles of stones. 3 letters are carved deep into the bark. JC, his body has never been found. But his story, Jonathan's story, still travels, passed along in forums, in old paperbacks, and in whispered conversations among veteran rangers who know Texas Hill country better than anyone, because some places aren't lost. They're hiding, and some people don't vanish willingly. They vanish because someone is waiting for them. It began in the early summer of 1981. Jonathan Crestwell, 33 years old, drove alone into Texas Hill country, 30,000 square miles of limestone ridges, shadowy canyons, and winding rivers. That June, locals remembered, was suffocatingly hot. The Llano River glimmered under the sun like molten glass, and the cedar-cloaked hills trembled with the endless drone of Cicadas Hill. Country was the kind of place people went to disappear. For a few days to camp, to write, to simply vanish into solitude. Jonathan wasn't a Texan. He came from Boulder, Colorado, where he worked as a freelance nature writer and photographer. Only months before, he had published an essay about the quiet transformations that happen when a person spends time alone. In the wilderness, friends called him thoughtful, unhurried, and someone who could lose hours just listening to the wind. A gas station clerk in Mason, Texas, remembered him clearly. Afternoon of June 4, 1981, Jonathan came in asking for directions to a little-used trailhead near Hickory Creek, a tributary of the Llano River. He had maps, 2-gallon jugs of water, canned food, an olive green backpack, and a Nikon 35mm camera. Slung around his neck at a ranger station 15 miles west of Llano, he signed in as required. His handwriting was meticulous. Name, Jonathan M. Crestwell. Arrival, June 4, 1981. Return, June 8, 1981. Purpose, camping and photography. No one ever saw him again. When June 8 came and went, no alarm was raised. Jonathan lived a Lono spouse. No kids, no office job expecting him back. It wasn't until June 12 that Melissa, his sister, became worried. Jonathan always called her after a trip. This time, the phone stayed silent. She contacted the Llano County Sheriff's Office. Deputies checked the ranger station log and confirmed his intended route. A search team was mobilized that same day. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers from nearby towns. The weather had been stable. No storms, no floods. Jonathan's brown '73 Plymouth Valiant was found exactly where he told the ranger he'd leave it, under a cluster of live oaks at the dirt trail entrance. Inside his wallet in the glove box, a box of developed photographs, and a journal in which the last entry spoke of being glad to be swallowed by the green silence. There were no signs of distress. The trail he had chosen was obscure, favored only by locals. It cut deep into the hickory wilderness, beyond cell range. Through areas where no official map showed every bend or ridge, for 4 days, volunteers searched calling his name, probing caves, combing riverbanks. No tent, no pack, no camera, only absence. The official August 1981 report labeled him missing, presumed lost. The likeliest theory at the time was a fatal fall into a ravine or a collapse from dehydration. Melissa never accepted that. She raised funds, printed 2,000 flyers across Texas and Colorado. Her brother's face looked out from every telephone pole and store window with the words, "Have you seen this man?" In 1983, 2 hikers claimed they'd found an olive sleeping bag and a dented cooking pot near a dry creek bed in Cavern Draw. 11 miles north of Hickory Creek, by the time a search party arrived, nothing was there. Either the hikers were mistaken or someone had removed the evidence. By 1985, the trail had gone cold. By 1987, 6 years after his disappearance, Jonathan Crestwell's story had settled into local legend. Among rangers, hunters, and guides, whispers grew. Some called him the ghost hiker, still walking the canyons unseen. Others murmured he had stumbled upon something he shouldn't have: a smuggler's hideout, an old moonshiner's route, or a secret shelter for fugitives. But in the Llano Sheriff's office, his file sat in a gray metal cabinet with a red tab, marked inactive. Then, in 1989, a young deputy named Colton Myers joined the department. Eager and curious, he dug into old cases and found Jonathan's file. It gnawed at him the precision of the journal, the absence of gear, the strange fact that an experienced outdoorsman could vanish so completely in terrain that, while remote, was no Alaskan wilderness. Colton asked to reopen the search. His superior shut him down. "That one's done, son. We got bodies with names on them. Crestwell's gone." Still, Colton quietly kept working. In late 1990, Melissa sent a box of Jonathan's belongings from Boulder to the sheriff's office. Inside were 2 undeveloped film rolls and a second trail map one never found in his car. This map had red ink markings, a loop not shown on official park charts, a series of tight switchbacks, and a clearing marked with an X. Cross-checking satellite images, Colton saw it led to a ridge above the South Fork of Hickory Creek, a place locals called Buzzard's Hollow. Sheer drops, dry air. No 1981 search party had ever reached it. Colton requested a formal search. Denied again. So on February 2nd, 1991, he went anyway, bringing only his cousin, a seasoned local guide named Wesley Calder. The 2 men hiked toward Buzzard's Hollow, following the same red ink path Jonathan had once marked. After 6 grueling hours of climbing, they finally reached the plateau, just beyond a small grove of mesquite trees. They saw it something out of place. Half buried in the cracked soil lay the rusted frame of a portable camp stove, choked by leaves and bits of limestone. A few steps away, a scrap of faded olive-green fabric clung stubbornly beneath a boulder. It matched the type of backpack that Daniel Rivers had once carried. But the thing that stopped Detective Cole Maddox in his tracks was a cedar tree, weathered, with deep carvings in its bark. 3 letters and a date, still legible after years of wind and rain: DRR 6681. June 6th, 2 days after Daniel had signed the ranger log. There was no doubt he had been here. June 7th, saw a man this morning, didn't wave back. He stood above the ridge, not a hiker, no gear, just standing. Something's wrong. June 8th, moving camp at first light. I can't sleep. The man came closer last night. I didn't imagine it. He stood near the trees for hours. I packed, but I'm too tired to walk in the dark. Tomorrow, I leave. There were no more entries up until then. Every theory had pointed to an accident heat stroke, a fall, a snake bite. But now there was the possibility of another person, someone who had been in those hills, deliberately avoiding contact. Maddox combed through every missing person. Report from 1980 to 1985. One stood out: Elias Monroe. a drifter arrested in 1979 for trespassing on private land, known to live alone in the wilderness for months at a time. Monroe had a documented history of mental illness. In 1981, an old sheriff's log recorded him wandering barefoot near Hickory Creek. By 1982, he had disappeared entirely. No arrest records, no sightings, no body. Was Monroe the man Daniel saw? Or someone else, entirely a hermit, a fugitive, a predator? The Hill Country had always hidden its secrets well. When news broke of the 1995 rediscovery, local papers blared. Headlines like, "Lost Writers Camp Found After 14 Years, Was He Being Watched?" Old rumors resurfaced. Henry Collister, a rancher in his 70s, claimed that in the early 80s, several of his goats had vanished near Raven's Hollow. Once he had found animal bones arranged in a circle by a dry creek bed. A former game warden, Travis Bell, told the Hill Gazette that in 1982 he stumbled upon a hidden shelter deep in a gulch in animal pelts, canned food, and crude drawings on stone walls. He hadn't reported it because it seemed odd, not criminal. When he returned months later, it was gone, burned to the ground. Nothing came of these leads, but together they hinted at an unsettling possibility. Someone had been living out there, watching, moving, surviving. Some believed Daniel had encountered a territorial recluse who forced him to flee or silenced him. Others whispered about the feral man, legendan, unhinged figure who had abandoned society. Living off the land in secrecy, skeptics argued it was nothing more than heat-induced paranoia. That Daniel's exhaustion had twisted his senses, causing him to flee from a threat that didn't exist until he fell or became lost. But Margaret Rivers, Daniel's sister, rejected that outright. "My brother was not paranoid," she said. "If he wrote that someone was there, then someone was there." Her conviction kept the case alive in the hearts of those who had followed it from the start. Among the recovered items, one had seemed too damaged to matter, that broken 35mm camera lens, buried near the tent. But in January 1996, after public pressure mounted, the Texas Department of Public Safety sent the camera body, lens, and what was left of the film spool to a lab specializing in salvaging degraded media. What they found inside would reopen every question it had taken. Weeks of painstaking work, the old camera's metal casing was riddled with corrosion, and moisture had welded parts of the film into a sticky, fragile clump. But the technicians didn't give up. They managed to pull 3 frames from the final roll. The images were far from perfect, grainy, streaked with light leaks, and scarred by time, but what they revealed would spark the mystery all over again. Frame 1 was a classic landscape, unmistakably in Alan Brooks's style, the horizon perfectly balanced. Tree branches framing the sky, golden hour light spilling. Across the hills, peaceful, ordinary, nothing to raise an eyebrow. Frame 2 was different. It was a self-timer, Chatillon, standing before a jagged rock formation, the remote shutter in his hand. He wasn't smiling. His stance was rigid, almost wary, but the real detail wasn't him. Between 2 trees in the background, just far enough to be hard to notice, stood a figure. Still, watching Dot zooming in revealed a man, slim build, hair tangled and unkempt, no backpack or gear in sight. One shoulder pressed against a tree, as if using it for cover. His eyes caught just enough light to glint at the camera, like he knew it was there. Frame 3 was nearly unreadable, dark, blurred, maybe taken by accident in the dead of night. But in the lower corner, faint and smeared by motion, was the outline of a hand reaching forward. Whether it was Alan's or someone else's couldn't be determined. The 3 photographs were enough for former Deputy Mark Donovan to reopen the cold case. They proved one thing: Alan Brooks had not been alone in those hills. The renewed investigation stirred interest, but no fresh evidence emerged. The stranger in the trees, the faint hand, and Alan's trail had been swallowed by the wild, by time, or perhaps by someone's intent. No body, no confession, no witnesses. In 1997, Alan Brooks was declared legally dead. His sister Claire refused to hold a funeral. She kept his weathered journal, the enhanced photo of the second frame, and a map of hill country pinned to her wall with a single red marker at Buzzard's Hollow. In an interview that year, she said quietly, "Somewhere out there, someone knows. And someday, maybe silence won't be enough to keep it buried." Early in 1998, Mark Donovan, no longer a deputy, now a private investigator, received an unexpected phone call. The caller was Bobby Hale, caretaker of a property 30 miles southwest of Hickory Creek, near Junction, Texas. Bobby had been clearing the attic of an old ranch house that once belonged to Harold Nunn, a reclusive landowner who had died in 1995. Nunn had lived alone, fiercely protective of his 2,000 acres. Bordering the southern edge of Buzzard's Hollow, locals remembered his warning signs, his locked gates, and the stories of how he'd run trespassers off with a shotgun in hand in a sealed metal box. Bobby found a leather-bound journal sporadic entries spanning 1979 to 1984, written in tight, almost angry cursive. The tone was paranoid, distrustful. One entry from June 1981 read, "Saw a stranger in the northern ridge. Not local, camera around his neck. Don't like it, don't trust it. Not the first one wandering through here." Another, dated June 9th, 1981, simply stated, "Still no sign of the hiker. Maybe he found what was left." It wasn't signed, but the words were chilling. Donovan pushed for permission to search Nunn's former land. By then, it had passed to a distant nephew, who agreed so long as they stayed away from the livestock enclosures. On March 28, 1998, Donovan set out with 2 volunteers and a cadaver dog into a secluded valley that had never been formally surveyed. What they found was strange. A collapsed stone structure, possibly a hunting shelter, decades old, lay hidden in the brush. Scattered around were animal bones, likely deer and goat, some deliberately stacked into triangular arrangements. Beneath a rusted iron panel nailed into the hillside, they uncovered a sealed tin box. Inside were 2.22 caliber rounds, a faded Polaroid of a distant ridge, its date unreadable, and an Ecclesa, small silver compass pendant. When Claire saw the compass, she recognized it instantly. "It was a gift from our father," she said. Alan wore it on every single trip. There was still no body, no undeniable evidence of a crime. But now the valley was officially a crime scene. In June 1998, forensic specialists managed to extract degraded DNA from the tiny hinge of the compass using advanced touch DNA techniques. The partial genetic markers matched a sample taken from Alan's toothbrush years earlier. It wasn't enough to legally rule his death a homicide, but it proved something he had worn, ended up far from his last known campsite. How did it get there? Did Alan run? Was he pursued? Or did someone take it from him? No answer emerged. Donovan began digging deeper into Harold Nunn's past in the late 1970s. Nunn had been arrested for brandishing a rifle at 2 hikers. The charges vanished after both men refused to return to Texas to testify. Locals said Nunn was unstable, known to mutter to shadows, and convinced strangers were spying on his land for oil companies or the government. One rumor claimed Nunn had buried something near a dry gulch, telling a neighbor he was keeping secrets safe from thieves. That neighbor, now 81 and living in Kerrville, confirmed the tale. He added that Nunn had once sketched a crude map on a napkin, marking a spot near a broken cedar and a split rock. Donovan took the lead, the old clue burning in his mind. Somewhere in those hills, under decades of dirt and silence, he believed the rest of the truth still waited. In November of 1998, Ethan Carver returned to Ravens Hollow. This time, he came in from the southern ridges, where the late Conrad Vaught land met the edge of public forest. For 2 relentless days, he pushed through underbrush and frozen creek beds, following nothing but instinct. On the second evening, he found it, a colossal boulder, split clean down the middle, as if some ancient lightning bolt had torn it in 2. Beneath the shadow of its jagged edges was a shallow depression littered with stones, not scattered, stacked, deliberately by hand. It took Ethan hours, his fingers raw and bleeding, to pull away the last of them. At the bottom lay a metal ammunition box, rust welded shut. He pried it open with a hunting knife, the hinges groaning as if waking from a decades-long sleep. Inside, a notebook burned along its edges, pages warped beyond recognition, and one other thing, a Polaroid photograph. This one was sharp, crystal clear. It showed Daniel Whitford. His posture was rigid, hands pinned behind his back, his gaze slightly unfocused. The photograph had been taken at dusk. The trees behind him were dark strangers to Ethan's eyes, woods he didn't recognize. The image was real. too real. But the question gnawed at Ethan, who had taken it. Martinez asked Webb what the contingency plan was. Webb said if the operation was ever exposed, Patterson had a final meeting place where all evidence would be destroyed and loose ends tied up. It was an abandoned mine shaft in Nevada. Patterson owned it under a false name. Martinez told Webb he would take them there. Webb's lawyer said that was not part of the deal. Martinez said it was now, and that they were going to end the conspiracy. The mine was in the Nevada desert, about 60 miles from Las Vegas. FBI agents had been watching it for 2 days, but Patterson had not shown up. Webb sat in the back of an FBI van wearing a bulletproof vest and a wire. Martinez placed sharpshooters on the hills and set up a command post. She told Webb to get Patterson talking so they could get him to confess to ordering Deputy Brennan's murder. Webb said Patterson was smart and would not just admit it. Martinez told him to make him. David Brennan was allowed to watch from the command post with Sheriff Reeves. They watched the mine entrance on the monitors, David said after 17 years, it was finally ending. Reeves told him his father would be proud because his investigation was taking down a whole criminal group. At 3 o'clock, a dust cloud appeared in the distance. A black SUV drove toward the mine. It stopped about 50 yards away. Webb confirmed. It was Patterson. Patterson looked older than in the 1986 photos. His hair was gray and his face lined, but he still looked confident and well-dressed. Martinez noted he was alone. Webb said he did not need security because he had planned this. For years, Patterson went inside the mine and then came out and signaled to the van. Webb said Patterson wanted him to come alone. Martinez said no, but Webb said Patterson would leave otherwise, and this was their only chance. She told him to go, but the team would follow and move in if something went wrong. Webb walked to the mine. The agents heard everything through his wire. Patterson greeted him and said prison had made him look terrible. Patterson said they should have shut the operation down years ago, but there was too much money and too many people relying on it, including Webb and especially himself. He said keeping a false identity for 24 years was expensive. Webb looked around and saw old mining equipment and gasoline cans. He told Patterson he was planning to burn the place and all the evidence. Patterson asked what evidence and then pulled out a metal box. It held financial records, contact lists, photographs, and other proof linking them to the Chicago operation and to Deputy Brennan's murder. Patterson said killing Brennan was necessary because Brennan was getting too close to the truth. In the command post, Martinez smiled and said they had him. Patterson said he had tried to move Brennan to another jurisdiction, but Brennan refused and kept investigating the county contracts, so Patterson had him killed. He said Robert Harwell did it, but panicked and involved his son, which led to the whole mess. 17 years of planning ruined by a farmer digging in an old barn. Webb asked about the others. Patterson said Dorothy, Kim was safe in South America and the Chicago people cut ties years ago. Webb said so, it was just them. Patterson said no, it was just him. Then he pulled out a gun and aimed it at Webb. You are no longer useful, Marcus, Patterson said. The FBI is listening to everything we say. I figured they would, Marcus answered. That's why I brought these. Patterson kicked one of the gas cans sitting near him. This mine shaft is going to blow up. It will look like a tragic accident. You will die too, Marcus said. I have been dead for 24 years, Patterson replied. This will just make it official. Agent Martinez spoke into her radio. Move in now. The suspect is armed and dangerous. The FBI tactical team rushed into the mine. In the darkness, they heard shouting and the sound of a fight. Then a gunshot rang out, echoing through the chamber. Webb is down, a voice said over the radio. The suspect is barricaded in the back of the mine. Agent Martinez stayed calm. Get medical help for Webb, surround the mine, and don't let Patterson escape. For the next hour, FBI negotiators tried to talk to Patterson, but he would not answer. Finally, they heard another gunshot from deep inside. One shot, the team leader reported. No more sounds after that. When they reached the deepest part of the mine, they found Patterson dead from a self-inflicted gunshot. To the head, beside his body, was a metal box with evidence going back 24 years. Webb survived his gunshot wound. He was taken to a hospital in Las Vegas. His help had ended the longest-running criminal conspiracy in the county's history. David Brennan stood at the mine entrance as the sun set over the Nevada desert. After 17 years, the man who ordered my father's murder is finally dead, he said. It's over, Sheriff Reeves told him. Not quite, David replied. I still need to bury my father. Agent Martinez walked over. The evidence in Patterson's box will lead to more arrests. This conspiracy involved people in 4 different states. How many more? David asked. At least 12. More suspects, maybe even more, she said. David thought about his father, a small-town deputy who had accidentally discovered a multi-million-dollar criminal operation. Tom Brennan had been killed for trying to do the right thing. 17 years later, his investigation had finally succeeded. You never gave up, David said quietly. Even after they killed you, your work kept going. You were a real law enforcement officer? Yes, Agent Martinez agreed. He is an example for all of us. Asterisk before leaving, David looked one last time at the dark mine, where his father's killers had met their end. Justice had come at a high price. Tomorrow, he would start planning his father's funeral. After 17 years, Deputy Thomas Brennan was finally coming home. The federal investigation grew quickly after Patterson's death. The metal box from the mine held detailed records of the conspiracy, including names, dates, and financial transactions. That covered 20 years. Agent Martinez set up a task force in Millbrook. She worked with law enforcement in 4 states. The evidence showed a complex network of corruption far beyond the original county contracts. At a press conference, Agent Martinez made an announcement. We have identified 23 people involved in the conspiracy. 12 have been arrested, 7 are dead. 4 are still wanted. David Brennan sat in the front row with Sheriff Reeves and Jake. For the past month, the investigation had taken over his life. Now he felt some peace, knowing that his father's killers were being brought to justice. The conspiracy included money laundering, fixing contract bids, corrupt judges, and even murder. Deputy Brennan died because he was investigating crimes that protected a criminal operation worth over $15 million, Agent Martinez said. After the press conference, David spoke privately with her. What happens now? The trials will take years, she said. Eugene Hartwell and Marcus Webb will testify against the others. Your father's case will be the main focus of the prosecution. Will there be a trial for his murder? David asked. Eugene Hartwell has already pleaded guilty to helping after the fact. Robert Hartwell is dead and Patterson killed himself. But the conspiracy charges will make sure that everyone else faces long prison sentences. Detective Chen joined them. David, there is something else you need to know. We found more evidence in Patterson's files. What kind of evidence? David asked. Your father was not the only law enforcement officer killed. Between 1987 and 1995, there were 3 other suspicious deaths. David felt a chill. Other police officers? Yes, Chen said. A state trooper, a county sheriff from a nearby county, and a federal agent. All of them were looking into parts of the same criminal network. We believe they were all murdered. Patterson had kept careful notes on what he called security measures to protect the operation. Agent Martinez opened a folder. Your father's investigation was more important than we first thought. He had found proof of a multi-state conspiracy responsible for many deaths. David asked, how many people died? We are still checking, Martinez said, but at least 7 law enforcement officers and 3 civilians. David tried to take it all in. His father had been fighting not just local corruption, but a large and dangerous network. The truth had taken almost 2 decades to uncover, and even with the main man dead, there were still pieces of the case to finish, and more people to arrest. My father died trying to stop people who killed many others. He was a hero. Agent Martinez said that even after my father died, his work helped take down one of the most dangerous criminal groups in the area. That afternoon, I went to the county courthouse to see the last of the evidence. The records room had many boxes filled with papers that had been taken during the case. County Clerk Jennifer Walsh was there to help me. She had been given her job after the old officials were removed for being part of the plot. She showed me my father's original case files. She said they had been hidden in Judge Patterson's private office. He kept them to use as protection against the others in the group. I opened the file. Inside were my father's handwritten notes. They told the story of his investigation. The last note was dated March 15, 1986. It said, "Meeting tonight with an unknown source. They expect to give proof of the plot. If something happens to me, the evidence is in a safety deposit box at First National Bank." I asked if anyone had checked that box. She said, "Not until last week. The FBI had found it by looking through my father's belongings." I asked what was in the box. Jennifer took out another box of evidence. Inside were photographs, bank records, and audio recordings. My father had been secretly recording meetings with county leaders for weeks before he died. I played one of the tapes. I heard my father's voice for the first time in 17 years. He was talking with Robert Hartwell about fake construction contracts and money being paid to county leaders. I knew then that my father understood the danger he was in. He had been building a case against them all. Agent Martinez told me that the recordings would be a key part of the trials. She also said my father had done most of the hard work even after his death. The next day, I spoke to the public. I stood at a podium in the courthouse where my father had once worked. Many police officers and people from the community were there. I said, "My father, Deputy Thomas Brennan, was killed 17 years ago because he was investigating corruption here. He died while trying to protect the people he served." The case that began with his disappearance has now uncovered a criminal group that reached across state lines and caused many deaths. The men who killed my father thought they had ended his work forever. They were wrong. I looked at the crowd. I saw many of my father's old friends and coworkers. I said, "My father's case is finished. Justice has been done." After the press conference, I met with the families of the other police officers who had been murdered. They had formed a group to support each other and were planning a service to honor all the victims. One woman named Maria Santos spoke to me. Her husband had been a state trooper killed in 1989, she said. "Without the proof your father found, none of our cases would have been solved." I told her my father would have been proud to know that his work had helped all of their families find justice. That night, I sat alone in my hotel room. I went over the timeline of the case. It began on March 15, 1986, when my father disappeared. It ended today with the arrest of the last men involved. Almost 20 years had passed. My phone rang. It was Sheriff Reeves. He said, "David, the county commission voted tonight to name the new courthouse in town after your father." I said, "That was very kind," he told me. "It's the least we can do. Your father saved this community from many years of crime and corruption." The next morning, I walked through the courthouse one last time. The sun shone through the tall windows. Workers were already putting up a new sign that would carry my father's name. People passing by stopped to watch. Some nodded in respect. Others placed their hands over their hearts. I thought about how my father had started as a small-town deputy who believed in doing what was right, no matter the cost. When he found signs of a massive criminal plot, he could have looked the other way. But that was not who he was. He followed the trail even when it led to powerful people. He kept gathering proof even when the danger grew. And when they silenced him, they thought the truth would die with him. But it did not. His notes survived. His recordings survived. His will to see justice done survived in me and in others who believed in him. That is why the case did not end until every piece of the plot was brought into the open. In the days that followed, the trials began. Witnesses testified about the bribes, the fake contracts, and the threats. Some of the accused tried to make deals. Others stayed silent. The prosecutors used my father's tapes again and again to prove the charges. Each time the jury heard his voice, it was like he was in the room, standing against them himself. The families of the other victims came to the courthouse often. We sat together during the hearings. We told stories about the ones we lost. We talked about the years when it felt like no one cared and justice would never come. Now we were seeing the truth laid out in court for everyone to hear. I kept one of my father's notebooks with me during those days. It was worn, and the pages were full of his tight handwriting. In the front, he had written a short sentence that I will never forget. It said, "The law must serve the people, or it is nothing." That was what drove him until the end. That was what kept me going when the case felt too big to finish. Months later, when the first sentences were read out loud, I felt a heavy weight lift. Some of the guilty would spend the rest of their lives in prison. Others would never walk free again. The conspiracy that had taken so much from us was finally broken. On the day the courthouse was officially named, I stood with my family and with Sheriff Reeves. The sign read, "Thomas Brennan Courthouse." I spoke to the crowd. I said my father's story was not only about his death, but about his life and his belief in what was right. I said the building would stand as a reminder that truth can survive even the darkest times. When the ceremony ended, I walked away knowing that my father had come home, not only in name, but in the justice he had fought for. David asked when the dedication ceremony would be. Sheriff Reeves said they hoped he could come next month. The whole law enforcement community wanted to be there. David agreed to go. When he hung up the phone, he felt a kind of peace he had not felt in 17 years. His father's death had finally been avenged. His sacrifice had been honored. Tomorrow, David would start planning the funeral he had waited 17 years to hold. Deputy Thomas Brennan was finally coming home. The funeral took place on a sunny Tuesday morning in October. The Melbourne Community Church was full. Every seat was taken. Law enforcement officers from all over the region had come. Family members and leaders from the community were there to show respect. David stood at the podium. He looked out at a crowd filled with uniforms and familiar faces. His father's casket sat in front of the altar with an American flag draped. Over it, David began to speak. He said his father had served the community with honor and integrity for 15 years. He believed officers had a sacred duty to protect and serve all people, no matter their position or power. When he found corruption in the county government, he did not look away. He did not take bribes. He did not give in to threats. He kept doing his job even though it cost him his life. Sheriff Reeves spoke next. He said Tom Brennan was the kind of officer they all wanted to be. He was honest and dedicated. He was brave. His investigation continued even after his death, and it made the community safer and more fair. FBI Agent Martinez addressed the church. He said Deputy Brennan's investigation had led to the arrest and conviction of 23 people who were part of a criminal group that worked across several states. His work had stopped many future crimes and had saved lives. Eugene Hartwell spoke next. He was under guard, but had been given permission to attend. He said he had helped cover up Deputy Brennan's murder for 17 years. He said he could never undo that wrong, but wanted the family to know he was sorry. He promised to help make sure the truth was known. The service ended with a 21-gun salute. The sound echoed outside, then taps was played. David watched as 6 deputy sheriffs carried the casket from the church. His father was finally getting the honor guard he had earned. At the cemetery, David gave the final eulogy. He said his father died believing that justice would win in the end. That day, his father's faith had been proven right. The men who killed him were either dead or in prison. The corruption he had been fighting had been exposed and stopped. More than that, his example now inspired officers everywhere. He had shown that doing the right thing was worth any price. After the burial, David went to the new courthouse for the dedication ceremony. The building would now be called the Thomas Brennan Courthouse. A bronze plaque was uncovered. It had his father's name and the words dedicated to the memory of Deputy Thomas Brennan, a hero who died serving justice. County Commissioner Torres spoke. He had been cleared of any role in the conspiracy. He said Tom Brennan's sacrifice was a reminder that democracy depends on public servants who are willing to stand against crime and corruption. It was officially closed 6 months later. The FBI's final report showed the full reach of the criminal group and the harm they had done to the community. Marcus Webb was given life in prison without parole. Eugene Hartwell got 20 years for helping hide the murder. 12 others were sentenced to between 10 and 30 years. Dorothy Kim, who had been the county treasurer, was caught in Brazil and sent back to the United States. She got 25 years for money laundering and conspiracy. The group had laundered over $18 million. They were also responsible for killing 7 law enforcement officers and 4 civilians. The courthouse dedication and the funeral brought the community together. People who had not spoken in years now shook hands. Officers who had once feared the case now stood proud. David knew that his father's name would be remembered for generations. The plaque would hang in the courthouse long after everyone in that crowd had gone. In the weeks after the funeral, David kept getting letters. Some came from officers his father had trained. Others came from families of victims his father's case had helped. They all told stories of how his work had changed their lives. David read every letter. He kept them in a box next to his father's old badge. Life slowly began to return to normal, but the investigation's shadows still lingered. Trials went on for months. Some of the convicted tried to appeal, but none succeeded, reporters wrote. Long articles about the case calling it one of the most important in the county's history. David sometimes drove by the courthouse at night. The lights in the windows made the plaque shine in the dark. He thought about how his father had walked those same steps so many years ago, not knowing he would never come home. Now the building stood as proof that his work had not been in vain. 1 year after the dedication, a memorial service was held at the courthouse steps. Names of the fallen officers and civilians were read out loud. Each name was followed by the toll of a bell. When his father's name was called, David felt the same mix of pride and sadness he had felt at the funeral. By then, the community was changing. New leaders were elected. Policies were put in place to prevent the kind of corruption his father had fought against. Young officers joined the force, knowing the story of Tom Brennan. For many of them, it was the reason they chose the job. David spoke at that first anniversary service. He told the crowd that his father's story was not only about tragedy, it was about courage and the belief that the truth matters. He said every person there could honor that by standing up for what was right in their own lives. When the service ended, David stayed behind for a while. He touched the bronze plaque. The words were cold under his fingers, but they warmed him inside. His father's name was carved in metal, but also in the hearts of everyone who remembered him. In time, the case became something told in history classes and training sessions for police. The younger generation learned not just the facts, but the lessons that one person can make a difference, that honesty can survive even in dangerous times, that sacrifice can change the course of a community. For David, the pain never fully went away, but it became easier to carry. He knew that his father had not died for nothing. The dedication of the courthouse and the long list of convictions were proof of that. More importantly, the people who lived in the county could now walk their streets without fear. That was the legacy Tom Brennan had left behind. The investigation led to big changes in the county government. There was now stronger oversight of public contracts. David Brennan went back to his law practice in Chicago, but he still stayed involved in law enforcement issues. He started the Thomas Brennan Foundation to give scholarships to children of officers who died in the line of duty. Jake Morrison kept the farm, but he turned the barn where the patrol car had been found into a memorial garden, a small plaque. There honored Deputy Brennan's service and sacrifice. 5 years after the investigation ended, David came back to Millbrook for a memorial service. The town had grown and was now free from the corruption that had damaged it for so many years. Sheriff Reeves, now retired, joined David at his father's grave. "How do you think he would feel about all of this?" she asked. "I think he would be proud that justice was served," David said. "But I think he would be even more proud that his investigation led to reforms that will protect future generations. His death was not in vain." "No, it wasn't," Reeves said. "He died a hero and will be remembered as one." As the sun set, David placed fresh flowers on the grave. The headstone read, "Deputy Brennan, beloved father, dedicated officer, American hero." The investigation that had begun with a farmer finding something in an old barn was now over. After 17 years, Deputy Thomas Brennan had justice, and his sacrifice had been honored. The corruption in Millbrook County was gone. The people who killed honest officers were either in prison or dead. The community was safer and more fair because of Tom Brennan's courage and dedication. His work proved that the truth, no matter how long hidden, would eventually come out. Justice had been delayed, but it had finally come. David left the cemetery knowing his father's legacy would inspire officers for years to come. The deputy who had vanished on a country road in 1986 had finally come home. Epilogue. County years after the investigation ended, Millbrook County became known as a model for government transparency and accountability. The reforms after the corruption scandal made sure crimes like that could not happen again. The Thomas Brennan Foundation had given scholarships to over 200 children of fallen officers. David Brennan had become a well-known national advocate for police reform and honest government. The old Hartwell farm, now owned by Jake Morrison, was turned into a community center. It hosted law enforcement training and activities for local youth. The memorial garden where the patrol car had been found reminded everyone of the price of corruption and the importance of integrity in public service. Eugene Hartwell died in prison in 2015, taking the last secrets of the conspiracy with him. Marcus Webb was still in federal prison, serving life for his part in the murders. Sheriff Reeves often visited schools to tell students about Deputy Brennan's investigation and the importance of doing what is right. She always ended her talk with the same message: one person with courage can change the world. The case of Deputy Thomas Brennan became a model for how to investigate corruption. Police agencies across the country studied it as an example of persistence, dedication, and the final victory of justice. The deputy, who vanished in 1986, had become a symbol of everything good and honorable about law enforcement. His investigation, which continued for 17 years after his death, saved lives and protected communities. Thomas Brennan's legacy lived on in the officers he inspired, the reforms he made possible, and the justice he helped achieve. He proved that truth and justice, even if delayed, will always win. His sacrifice was not wasted. His memory would live forever.